When Adam walked into my office for the first time, he carried himself with a sense of calm precision that I had seen before in other high achievers. His handshake was firm, his clothes neatly pressed, and his words meticulously chosen, as though he had prepared a script. But behind the composed exterior, his eyes betrayed a different story, one of exhaustion, perhaps even fear. "I guess I don't know where to start," he began, his voice steady but tinged with hesitation. "Everyone thinks I have it all together. My co-workers, my boss, even my family. They think I'm this ambitious, disciplined guy who's always one step ahead. But, I don't feel that way. Lately, I feel like I'm running on fumes." I let the silence stretch out for a moment, giving him space to find his footing. When he didn't continue, I asked, "What does running on fumes look like for you?" "I guess it's the little things," he admitted. "I'm forgetting to eat meals. Sometimes, I go home, lie down for a few minutes, and the next thing I know, it's morning. And when I do wake up, I'm not even rested. My body's there, but my mind is already back at the office." There was a brief pause, and I saw his jaw tighten. "It's not just the physical stuff, though. I don't know how to explain it, but everything else feels irrelevant. I used to love catching up with my college friends or grabbing a drink after work with my team. Now, it feels like a distraction, like I'm wasting time. So I don't go. I make excuses. And it's not like anyone really notices, anyway." "Do you miss it?" I asked. "The time with friends, the drinks, the connections?" His answer was swift, almost defensive. "I don't have time to miss it. There's always another deadline, another project. And honestly, what's the point? Social stuff doesn't get you promoted. It doesn't pay your bills." The words hung heavy in the room. I waited, sensing he wasn't finished. "But sometimes I see other people at work. They laugh, they joke around in the break room, they leave right at 5 and don't look back. And I wonder, how do they do it? How do they just shut it off? I can't even imagine what that feels like." Adam's voice wavered, and for the first time, his composure cracked. He stared down at his hands, fidgeting with his watch. "It's like I'm trapped. The harder I work, the further behind I feel. And if I stop, even for a second, it'll all come crashing down." I leaned forward slightly. "What would happen if it did? If you let yourself stop?" He didn't answer right away. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of the question was too much to bear. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's the scary part. I've built my whole life around being the guy who's reliable, who never misses a beat. If I stop, who am I?" The vulnerability in his words was palpable, and I could tell how deeply this question haunted him. It wasn't just about his job or his schedule, it was about his sense of identity, his worth. I knew we'd only scratched the surface, but it was a start. As we wrapped up that session, I thanked him for his honesty and encouraged him to think about something before our next meeting. What would life look like if you weren't chasing perfection? Not what you think others expect, but what you want for yourself. Adam nodded but didn't respond, his expression a mix of curiosity and trepidation. He had a long journey ahead, and he knew it. But for the first time, he was letting someone walk that path with him. The following week, Adam walked into my office with a different energy. He still looked tired, dark circles under his eyes and a stiffness in his posture, but there was something else. Attention, maybe, or perhaps it was reluctance. He sat down slowly, gripping the arms of the chair as though bracing himself. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice quieter this time. "What life would look like if I wasn't chasing perfection." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and let out a heavy sigh. "I don't know how to answer that. It's like, I can't picture it. Every time I try, my mind just goes blank. What does that even mean? To stop chasing?" I watched him closely as he struggled to articulate what had clearly been haunting him all week. He didn't wait for me to respond before continuing. I mean, isn't that what everyone's supposed to do? Work hard, push yourself, aim higher. That's how you succeed, right? That's what I was taught. My dad used to tell me, if you don't outwork everyone else, you'll end up with nothing. And I guess I took that to heart. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny thing is, I think I've got nothing anyway. Sure, I have a nice job and a decent paycheck, but what else? My friends stopped calling because I kept saying no. My family stopped asking me to visit because I'm always too busy. Even the team at work, I see the way they look at me. They don't really know me. How could they? I barely know myself. He sat back in the chair, rubbing his temples. The silence stretched, but I didn't fill it. He needed this moment to let it all surface. You know what's crazy? There was this retreat at work last month. Everyone was so excited about it, team-building games, hiking, bonfires. They kept telling me how much fun it was going to be, but I just couldn't bring myself to go. I told them I had too much work, but that wasn't it. He glanced at me, as if searching for some kind of permission to say the next part. I didn't go because I didn't want to be around them. Not because I don't like them, they're great people, but because I wouldn't know what to say. Outside of work, I don't know how to talk to people anymore. It's like I've forgotten how to, just be. To relax, to laugh, to enjoy myself. What would I even contribute? A conversation about spreadsheets and deadlines? There was a sharp edge to his words, but beneath it, I heard something else. Shame. Regret. I know it sounds stupid. It's just a retreat, right? But it's more than that. It's like, proof that I don't belong anywhere else but the office. And even there, I'm not sure I belong anymore. He paused, his hands now gripping the edges of his chair. His voice dropped, barely above a whisper. I think I'm afraid. Afraid that if I let go, even a little, it'll all fall apart. That I'll fall apart. I took a breath, letting his words settle in the room before speaking. It sounds like you've been carrying a lot on your shoulders for a long time. And it also sounds like the part of you that's been buried under all that pressure is starting to push its way to the surface. What would happen if you listened to it? If you let yourself explore what it's trying to tell you? Adam's gaze dropped to the floor, and he shook his head slightly. I don't know. Maybe I'd find out I've been doing it wrong all along. Or maybe, he stopped, his voice catching. Maybe I'd realize I'm not the person I thought I was. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. His vulnerability filled the room, and I felt the weight of how deeply these fears were rooted in him. He wasn't just grappling with stress or overwork, he was wrestling with his sense of identity, his purpose, and his worth. As the session came to an end, I asked him to try something small for the week ahead. Pick one thing you've been avoiding. It doesn't have to be big, just something that feels a little lighter, a little easier. And see what happens when you give yourself permission to show up for it. He nodded, though he still looked uncertain. If I do it, it'll feel weird, he admitted. That's okay, I said. Weird is part of the process. As he left, I couldn't help but feel hopeful. He had taken a step, even if it was a hesitant one. And sometimes, that's all it takes to begin. When Adam walked into my office the following week, I could sense a shift. It was subtle, his shoulders still bore the weight of stress, and his eyes were rimmed with fatigue, but there was a flicker of something else. Hesitation, maybe. Or possibility. I did it, he began, settling into the chair across from me. That thing you asked me to try, the one thing I've been avoiding. I actually did it. He let out a breath, almost as if he'd been holding it in since the moment he arrived. It wasn't anything big, he continued. I didn't, climb a mountain or reconnect with someone I ghosted years ago. But I did go out to lunch with a few coworkers. The ones who are always laughing and joking in the break room. Usually, when they ask, I just say I'm busy, but this time, I said yes. He leaned back, his hands fidgeting with the armrests. It was awkward at first. I didn't know what to say or how to jump into their conversations. They were talking about movies I haven't seen, trips they're planning. I thought, what am I even doing here? I felt like I didn't belong. But then, one of them turned to me and asked about this project I've been working on, the one everyone's been avoiding because it's such a headache. A faint smile played on his lips. I started explaining it, and they were actually interested. Not in a fake, polite way, but genuinely curious. We ended up talking about it for a while, and then someone made a joke about how they're glad I'm the one dealing with it and not them. It wasn't mean, it was funny. And for the first time in, I don't even know how long, I laughed. Like, really laughed. The smile lingered for a moment before fading. It felt good. But then, on the way back to my desk, I started overthinking it. Did I talk too much? Did they actually enjoy having me there, or were they just being nice? I couldn't stop replaying the whole thing in my head. And that's when it hit me, I don't even know how to let myself be okay with feeling good. It's like I'm wired to sabotage it. He paused, his expression turning more serious. I've spent so much time trying to be perfect, to be the guy who has all the answers, that I've forgotten how to just be human. It's like I've been living on autopilot, and now that I'm trying to step off, I don't even know where to go. I let his words settle before speaking. It sounds like you're beginning to see the patterns that have kept you stuck. That's not easy, Adam. It takes courage to face them. He nodded, his gaze distant, as if processing what I'd said. Yeah, but now what? I mean, I went to lunch, and it was fine, but it's not like everything's magically fixed. I still feel like I don't fit in, like I'm always a step behind everyone else. And there's this voice in my head that keeps saying I should stop wasting time and get back to work. That I can't afford to slow down. I leaned forward slightly, meeting his eyes. What do you think would happen if you did slow down? If you gave yourself permission to not have all the answers, even just for a moment? He hesitated, his jaw tightening as he considered the question. I don't know. Maybe nothing. Or maybe, everything. Maybe the whole house of cards comes crashing down, and I realize I've been faking it this whole time. His voice softened, barely audible. I think that's what scares me the most. The idea that if I stop, I'll find out I've been running in circles, chasing something that doesn't even matter. The vulnerability in his words was raw, unfiltered. He was peeling back layers he'd kept hidden for years, and I could see how deeply these fears were ingrained. Adam, what if the house of cards doesn't crash? What if, instead, you discover a foundation you didn't even know was there? One that's stronger because it's built on who you really are, not just what you do. He didn't respond right away, but I saw something shift in his expression. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps even hope. It was fleeting, but it was there. As the session came to an end, I encouraged him to keep exploring these moments of connection, however small. It's not about fixing everything at once, I reminded him. It's about learning to trust yourself, one step at a time. He nodded, a quiet determination settling in his features. I'll try, he said. I don't know if I can, but I'll try. When Adam came in this time, there was something lighter in the way he moved, though I could tell he wasn't entirely comfortable with it yet. He sat down, leaned forward slightly, and clasped his hands together, as though steadying himself for something uncertain. I think I might actually be getting it, he started, shaking his head as though he couldn't quite believe his own words. Or at least, I'm starting to understand what you meant about listening to that part of myself I've been ignoring. He glanced out the window for a moment, collecting his thoughts. You know how you told me to keep looking for those small things I've been avoiding? Well, I took it a little further. I didn't plan to, it just kind of happened. His lips curved into a faint, almost sheepish smile. I went to visit my parents. I haven't been back home in over a year. They always invite me for dinner, but I've been too busy. Or, at least, that's what I tell them. But last weekend, after work, I just drove there. No texts, no calls. I showed up at the door like some surprise guest. My mom looked so shocked, like she didn't know whether to hug me or scold me for making her panic. He paused, the memory clearly filling him with a mix of emotions. She hugged me, by the way. So did my dad. It was nice. We ended up sitting at the kitchen table, just talking. Not about work, or deadlines, or anything stressful. Just about them. About their garden, my mom's new hobby with watercolor painting, my dad's ridiculous obsession with crossword puzzles. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about emails piling up or unfinished projects. I was just there. His voice softened, and for a moment, it seemed like he might stop. Then he looked up, meeting my eyes. Do you know what my mom said to me? She said, "Adam, I've missed you." And it hit me so hard. I didn't even know what to say. I realized how much time I've lost. I've been so caught up in trying to be everything for everyone else, trying to prove myself, that I've been blind to the people who already love me for who I am. He let out a shaky breath, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair. It was the best night I've had in years. But then, as I was driving home, the guilt started creeping in. Like I shouldn't have taken that time, like I was falling behind again. I keep trying to tell myself that it's okay, that these moments matter too, but it's hard to undo years of thinking a certain way. I leaned back slightly, giving him space to let his emotions settle. It sounds like you're starting to reconnect with what truly matters to you, I said after a moment. And yes, it's going to feel unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable at first. But what you're doing now, choosing connection, choosing presence, that's how you begin to rebuild. Adam nodded, though he still looked unsure. I just don't want to screw it up, he admitted. I feel like I've wasted so much time already. I don't want to waste any more, but I don't even know where to start. How do I fix this? How do I make up for everything I've missed? I let the question hang for a moment, then offered him a thought. It's not about fixing or making up for lost time. It's about moving forward in a way that feels right for you. It's about giving yourself permission to show up as you are, not as the version of yourself you think you're supposed to be. And you're already doing that, Adam. It started with saying yes to lunch. It continued with showing up for your family. You're learning how to let yourself live again. His shoulders relaxed slightly, though the uncertainty didn't entirely leave his face. It just feels so fragile, he said quietly. Like one wrong move and I'll slip right back into old habits. Change takes time, I reminded him. It's not a straight line, and it's not always easy. But every time you choose connection, every time you choose presence, you're strengthening that part of yourself that wants something more. Trust that process. He nodded again, this time with a little more conviction. I'll try, he said. I guess that's all I can do, right? Just keep trying. As he left, I could see the conflict still lingering in his expression, but there was also a quiet determination. He was beginning to see the possibilities beyond the walls he'd built around himself, even if he wasn't entirely ready to step through them just yet. When Adam walked into my office for what would become our final session in this chapter of his journey, there was a quiet calm about him. It wasn't the strained composure he'd carried when we first met, nor the tentative uncertainty that had followed. This was something different. He sat down, glanced at me, and smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. I think I'm finally starting to understand, he began, his tone thoughtful. This whole process, the things you've been asking me to reflect on, it's not about fixing everything overnight. It's about learning to live with the imperfections. About finding a balance. He rested his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together. Last week, something happened that really put things into perspective for me. My team was celebrating the end of a big project, one of those group efforts that's been dragging on forever. Normally, I'd bow out, claim I needed to catch up on the next round of work. But this time, I stayed. I even suggested we go to this little pizza place near the office that everyone loves. It wasn't a big deal, but I felt different, lighter, just being part of the group. He paused, his smile softening as he reflected. And then one of my co-workers, Sarah, said something that stopped me in my tracks. She said, "It's nice seeing you like this, Adam. You're not usually so relaxed." I don't think she meant anything by it, but it hit me. Is that how people see me? Like I'm always wound up, always too busy to just be part of the moment. He sat back, shaking his head slightly. I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to be the guy who's there but not really there. I've spent so much time thinking that if I wasn't pushing myself constantly, I'd somehow lose everything. But now I'm starting to realize that what I was really losing was me. His voice grew quieter, tinged with emotion. I had this image in my head of what success was supposed to look like: promotions, recognition, being the guy everyone could count on. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why any of that mattered. I was so focused on proving myself that I didn't stop to think about who I was proving it to. My boss? My dad? Myself? I don't even know anymore. The room grew still for a moment, his words settling in the air like the calm after a storm. I let the silence stretch, giving him space to collect his thoughts. But here's the thing, he continued. I'm starting to see that success doesn't have to mean sacrificing everything else. It doesn't mean working myself into the ground or shutting people out because I'm afraid of looking weak. Success can be about balance, about showing up for the people who matter, about being present in the moments that count. And yeah, it's still scary. I'm not going to lie, there's a part of me that's terrified I'll slip back into old habits. But at least now I know what I'm working toward. He met my gaze, his expression resolute. I've started setting boundaries at work. Nothing drastic, just little things, like not checking emails after a certain time, or actually taking my lunch break instead of eating at my desk. It's amazing how something so small can feel like such a big step. And you know what? The world didn't end. The work got done. No one thought less of me for it. His smile returned, this time with a touch of humor. Who knew, right? Turns out, I'm not as indispensable as I thought. I couldn't help but smile back, proud of how far he'd come. Adam, you've done something many people struggle with their entire lives. You've faced the things that were holding you back, and you've started to make real, meaningful changes. That's no small feat. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I know there's still work to do. I'm not going to pretend I have it all figured out. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm heading in the right direction. And that's enough for now. As the session drew to a close, I asked him one final question. What does success look like to you now, Adam? Not the old version, but the one you're building for yourself. He thought for a moment before answering, his voice steady and sure. Success is waking up in the morning and feeling like my life is mine. It's knowing I've done my best at work without losing sight of the things that matter most, my family, my friends, my health. It's letting myself laugh, letting myself rest, and knowing that's enough. He stood, shook my hand, and smiled again, a smile filled with hope and possibility. As he walked out the door, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing he was ready to take the next steps on his own. If Adam's journey resonates with you, or if you've been struggling to find balance in your own life, I'd love to hear from you. Sometimes, sharing your story can be the first step toward change. Let me know your thoughts, I'm here to listen.